Hey everybody, we're going to be looking at graphing sine and cosine functions. Before we go ahead and jump right in, I want to kind of compare sine and cosine and what their graphs really look like. And it all actually kind of boils down to the unit circle. If you remember here, with the coordinates, the x, so that 1 is cosine, and the y, that 0, is sine. And that's what really kind of helps out determining the two graphs. So if you remember with the unit circle and the graph, so this x-axis is the angle measure, okay? It's not necessarily the x point, but it is it's the angle measure. So if we're looking at 0 for our angle, okay, so 0 for our angle puts us right here, okay. Our graph for the sine is also going to be 0. Well, going back to that unit circle, the sine is 0, so that would make sense for the graph to be at 0 if the sine on the unit circle is 0. Now, if we're looking at cosine, okay, the cosine at our angle 0. So right here is where our 0 is on the graph. What is our value at cosine? Well, it's 1, so that means our graph would start, so to speak, at 1. Okay, so the main difference between sine and cosine is where they start. I know that's kind of confusing because these graphs go on and on forever and ever, but when we're graphing them, we're going to start graphing them at that, either at 0, 0 for a sine or that 0, 1 for a cosine. Okay. Now the equation for these don't really change much. It's still going to have, like, our A is going to be our amplitude, our B is going to be our period, or 2 pi over B is our period, really. We're going to have that horizontal shift and that vertical shift. We're not going to focus on the horizontal shift much this week. We're really going to focus on vertical, the period, and the amplitude. So don't really worry too much about that horizontal shift. The only difference here, instead of seeing a sine, we may see a cosine. And then if that's the case, if we see a cosine there, we just know we have to start at that top point right there. Okay, we're not going to be starting at the midline like we would on the cosine. We would be starting above the midline or below the midline, depends on what the amplitude is. If the amplitude is negative, we would start below the midline. If it's above, or if it's positive, we would start above the midline. And then, of course, sine, we would start on the midline and then complete the cycle. Okay, so I've got some examples on Khan Academy, and that's what you're going to be doing this week, along with a quizzes assignment. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I've got, if I remember, y equals a sine, oh, that's not good, sine bx plus k. Okay, A is that amplitude, B is the period, and K is that vertical shift. So I see here in this one, we have a vertical shift of +4. So that means I need to move my midline up to 4, and I'm going to move this up too. Our amplitude is 3. So that means how high up we're going to go, we need to go up 3 and down 3. The graph kind of, the graph kind of follows the down part for you. So now the next part we need to really figure out is this 1/3. So if you remember from last week, I talked about 2 pi over b, or in our case we have is 1/3. So 2 pi over 1/3. To figure that out, you're going to keep change flip. So 2 pi times 3 over 1, not 1 over 3, but 3 over 1. And that becomes 2 pi times 3 is 6 pi. So what does that mean? That means that it takes the function to complete one cycle 6 pi. So I'm going to erase this here. So that means starting up and going down and making one full cycle from start to finish is 6 pi. Okay, so that means the halfway mark would be 3 pi. That means a quarter of the way would be 1.5 pi. Okay, so I want to, well, we could find that top part here would be 1.5 pi. So here is, we've got pi, so 1.5 pi would be over just 1, and I would see, is that halfway point at 3? Looks like it. Let's check. We got it. Good. Let's keep going. Here I've got -4 cosine x plus 3. So that means we have to move this function up 3. Our amplitude is -4, so that means I need to go down 1, 2, 3, 4. We are dealing with cosine. Remember, with cosine, it starts up top and then it goes down and then kind of completing that cycle. However, it's -4. It's -4. So it's actually going to start down low and go up and kind of look like that. So my graph does not look like that at all. So I need to, basically, I'm going to flip the points around. And we want to start, if our midline is at 3, -4 puts us at -1 from that midline. So 3 minus 4 is at -1. So we're going to go, so this is where that left point is in the perfect spot. The right point, I kind of have to figure out what is our period here. I don't have a B. So, or our B is technically 1. So we have 2 pi over 1. So that means it's going to take one full cycle. So going from the bottom and then going all the way up to the top and then back down to the bottom. Right now it's at 4 pi. So I need to bring it in a little bit. So there we go. So I brought it in one more. So it starts at 0, -1, goes up, and then it goes down back at 2 pi. So that's one cycle. So let's go ahead and check, make sure our answer is correct. Good. I'll do one more here. So our vertical shift is -4. We're dealing with sine, and our amplitude is 5. So I'm going to move this midline to -4. Our amplitude is 5. It's +5, so it's going to start going up first. And we need to go up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I got to figure out the period. So how is it stretched out or is it close together? So we want 2 pi over b, which is pi over 2. We'll keep change flip, so 2 pi times 2 over pi. Well, in this case, the pi's cancel out and we're left with 4. That should be a multiplication sign. So that means it's going to take 4 to complete one cycle. So it's going up, down, and then back. So that should be 4. So that means the halfway mark is going to be 2. This top part will be 1, half of that. So the halfway mark is at, I'm at the right spot right there. I did it kind of not knowing. Let's go ahead and check. And we are good. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask Mr. Mangold or myself. If we need to hold like a meeting this week to help you out, just feel free to ask.